"You're late," Judge Richard Caldwell snapped, his gavel cracking down like thunder. His voice was sharp, full of contempt. "Do you think this court bends around your schedule?" The Jefferson County Courthouse fell silent. The walls, peeling, beige paint, humming fluorescent lights, seemed to hold its breath. A bailiff smirked at the defendant's podium. The prosecutor chuckled. Standing there was Damian Cole, 34 years old, 6 feet tall, dressed in a tailored gray suit that fit like armor. He carried a leather folder pressed tight against his side. His calm eyes never left the judge. "With respect, Your Honor," Damian said, his voice controlled but edged with steel, "I was delayed by an urgent matter at my office. I arrived within minutes of the docket call." "Excuses," Caldwell barked, waving a dismissive hand. "Excuses waste time. Order matters here. Respect matters here. You are fined $750 for contempt." Gasps rippled across the courtroom. A woman in the back row whispered, "$750? For being late?" A clerk's pen froze mid-scribble. Damian's jaw tightened, but he did not bow his head. 30 minutes earlier, 2 white defendants had strolled in late, one still sipping his coffee, and neither received so much as a glance from the bench. Yet here he was, slapped with a fine large enough to crush a struggling family. "Your Honor," Damian began, choosing his words carefully, "I respectfully ask to—" "You may not," Caldwell cut him off, the gavel slamming again. "This is not a negotiation. Consider yourself taught." The gallery buzzed with whispers. Some leaned forward, sensing a story unfolding. Others looked away, uncomfortable with the raw imbalance on display. Damian returned to his seat, outwardly calm, though inside a storm churned. He thought of his grandfather's house, the chipped white siding, the oak tree that shaded summer afternoons, the hymns his grandmother once sang from the porch. That house had been home, safety, history. He was here today to protect it from a sudden, unjust tax hike. Now, that mission was clouded by humiliation. For 12 years, Damian had prosecuted traffickers, gang leaders, and corrupt sheriffs as a federal attorney. He had stared down dangerous men who thought themselves untouchable. And yet today, in this small courtroom, a judge had mocked and punished him like a misbehaving child. Damian knew this was more than a fine. It was a message, and he decided right then that this message would not go unanswered. When his case resumed, Damian stood tall at the podium. He placed his evidence folder on the desk with deliberate care. "Your Honor," he said, "the city raised my late grandfather's property tax by 30% without notice or justification. State law requires clear documentation for such an increase. I have brought records confirming no improvements, no reassessment, and no legal basis for this hike." Caldwell didn't even glance at the papers. He leaned back in his chair, feigning boredom. "The court will review in due course. But let me remind you, credibility matters, Mr. Cole, and tardiness undermines credibility." The words landed like stones. Damian's gaze didn't waver. His voice was calm, but it carried to every corner of the room. "With respect, Your Honor, rules should apply equally to all. This morning I watched 2 other defendants arrive late. They were not fined. Only I was." The room went still. A law student scribbled furiously in her notebook. The clerk raised her eyes, lips pressed, tight. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Caldwell's face reddened. "Are you questioning this court's integrity?" "I'm questioning consistency," Damian replied, his tone even but unyielding. The gallery stirred. Someone whispered, "He's right." Caldwell's gavel slammed down. "Enough, the fine stands." The session moved on, but the moment lingered, like smoke. By the time court adjourned, whispers had become murmurs of recognition. Everyone had seen it. Everyone knew. Damian gathered his papers, but he didn't leave. Hours later, as the benches emptied and the fluorescent lights buzzed louder in the near-empty room, he returned to the podium. Caldwell was still at his desk, shuffling papers. He glanced up, irritation plain on his face. "Mr. Cole, this court is adjourned. You may schedule an appointment." Damien stepped forward, his voice steady, deliberate. "Then allow me to reintroduce myself." He pulled a leather badge wallet from his pocket and opened it, holding it high so that everyone left in the room could see. "My name is Damien Cole, Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama. For 12 years, I've prosecuted corruption, civil rights violations, and organized crime across this state." The clerk froze, her pen dropping onto the desk. A young intern's mouth fell open. Caldwell stiffened. His eyes flickered. First with annoyance, then with the faintest trace of fear. "This morning," Damien continued, his voice sharpening, "you fined me $750 for tardiness." Meanwhile, 2 white defendants who arrived late were ignored. That discrepancy is not discipline, it is discrimination. And as an officer of the court, I am obligated by law to report it. The silence was suffocating. The bailiff shifted his weight. The clerk's breathing quickened. Caldwell tried to recover. "If you believe there was misconduct, file a complaint." "I already am," Damien said, raising a notebook thick with notes. "Not only for myself, but for every person who has stood before this bench and walked away knowing justice here was anything but blind." For the first time that day, Judge Caldwell had no words. The complaint hit the Judicial Review Commission within days. Investigators began pulling transcripts, reviewing fine records, dissecting sentencing logs. The data was staggering. Black defendants fined 3 times more than white defendants for the same infractions. White latecomers excused, black latecomers punished. The pattern stretched back years. Witnesses stepped forward. Clerk Mary Thompson, who had quietly logged years of troubling incidents, turned over her hidden notebook. "I couldn't stay silent anymore," she admitted. Bailiff Howard Green, grizzled and weary, finally broke. 15 years I stood by him. I told myself it wasn't my place, but I watched it happen again and again." The findings became public. Headlines blared across Alabama. Federal prosecutor calls out bias in courtroom. Judge accused of years of discrimination. Protests surged outside the courthouse. Hundreds of voices filled the streets holding signs. Justice should be blind. Fairness for all. Caldwell tried to defend himself, releasing a weak statement about misunderstandings and unintentional actions. Few believed him. Under the weight of the commission's evidence and the roar of public outrage, he resigned days before his disciplinary hearing. But Damien didn't call it victory. "One resignation doesn't fix the system," he told reporters. "The problem isn't just one judge. The problem is the silence that protects them." Reforms followed. Judges were required to undergo bias training. Independent oversight committees were created. Random audits of fines and sentences became law. Clerks were empowered to log and report inconsistencies without fear of retaliation. The courthouse itself began to change. Walls were repainted, new. Signage in multiple languages posted, and a brass plaque installed by the entrance. "Equal justice is everyone's right." Months later, Damien stood at a podium inside that same courthouse, now filled with young law students, clerks, and community members. His voice carried across the hall. "Justice isn't marble pillars or Latin phrases. It isn't the gavel or the robe. Justice is how we treat people when no one is watching. Fairness, dignity, respect. That is the true law." The applause was thunderous. Students rose to their feet. Clerks wiped away tears. As Damien stepped down, he thought again of his grandfather's house, the chipped paint, the oak tree, the laughter that once filled its walls. That house had nearly been stolen by bureaucratic indifference, but it still stood. More importantly, something larger now stood as well, a community's faith that the system could change, that silence could be broken, that fairness was still worth fighting for. Damien knew the battle was far from over. It never would be. But he also knew this. Sometimes, one unjust fine is enough to spark a fire. And if that fire burns long enough, it can light the way forward for everyone.